Before 1962, superheroes were statues that you looked up to. But after Spider-Man, well, superheroes were mirrors that we looked into. Now you gotta think that superheroes, they used to end their stories with like a handshake with the commissioner, right? And they would ride off into the sunset after saving the day. But in 1962, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, they gave us a completely different ending. They gave us a boy walking into the shadows, realizing that his new life as a superhero is going to be much more of a burden than it ever was going to be a blessing. This is the relic of the everyman. What Peter Parker didn't have was he didn't have a billionaire's cave. He didn't have any kind of alien fortress. Like, what he had was a bedroom in Queens and a guilt that just wouldn't quit. He paved the way for every hero who ever struggled to pay rent, every hero who ever felt like an outsider, every one of us who ever felt, that we weren't enough. He was Peter Parker, Spider-Man, was us embodied in the comics and the stories that we love so much. So for those who come after, the mask isn't just a disguise. It was an invention to realize that anyone can be a hero, especially the kid nobody notices. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the For Those Who Come After podcast. This episode is about our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And when you think of iconic superheroes, clearly Spider-Man's going to be in your list. There's probably a top three in no particular order: Batman, Superman, Spider-Man. Those are the three most iconic, most recognizable heroes in the entire universe, right? With that being said, it was so different and refreshing of what we got when we got Spider-Man back in the 60s, long before my time, long before I'm sure your time as well. But it paved the way for the superheroes that we love today. The superhero stories that we see, the Tony Stark as Iron Man in the MCU, like those kind of character arcs we got because they resonated home. They felt real life, and they dealt with real life problems. They allowed the man to become the god versus DC, who iconically had gods who wanted to be man. And Spider-Man really paved the way for that and the stories that we love so much now. Not only with comic books, but with superhero movies, with television shows, video games. The groundwork Spider-Man laid is incredible, and I think it needs to be talked about. So in this episode, I'm partnering up with the Dad Man. You've seen him on several episodes. You can find him at the Dad Man on all social media platforms that he's listed, and obviously I'll link his YouTube channel here in the comments below. He has a love for Spider-Man just like I do, and in this episode we get to go into really deep dives into what makes this superhero so iconic, why he was so important to us, and be able to kind of reminisce a little bit about simpler times, maybe, for when we had superheroes long before the MCU, when we were just kids back in the 90s watching Saturday morning cartoons. Spider-Man is so iconic. I'm ridiculously excited to get into this episode. So enough rambling from me. Let's jump right into the podcast. What's up, everybody? Today we are talking about Spider-Man, and specifically what that character means for myself, for our guest here, Dadman, and why Spider-Man was so impactful to really the whole landscape of the superhero genre, not in just movies and what we have right now with the MCU, but in comic book iterations, in cartoons, and all that kind of stuff, right? To me, when you're talking about For Those Who Come After, like, that kind of goes synonymous with superheroes with Spider-Man. It really does. And so now I will tell you, Dadman, before we kind of get started, I have already pre-recorded an intro to this. So everyone will already have your handles and where to be able to find you and everything. But I should have probably told you that before we started recording, but
That's okay.
fuck it, why not? But why don't you say hi to our guest, Dadman, and I would love for you just to give me a brief couple of minutes of, like, I know you're a big Spider-Man fan,
Yeah.
but before we kick off, like, the nuts and bolts of this character, tell us a little bit about what Spider-Man means to you.
So thanks for having me on again. I really appreciate it. I love having these conversations. Get to talk about stuff that you don't really get to talk about like an everyday. But Spider-Man. So it's interesting because when I was a kid, I was obsessed with Spider-Man. Like Spider-Man was my favorite superhero as a kid, and I'm gonna say as a kid a lot because I think that there is I mean we could probably do a different podcast about it, but there is like a maturation that happens when you become an adult that sometimes that shifts, that for me specifically. But my first exposure to Spider-Man when I was a kid was the animated cartoon,
Hmm.
on Fox Kids. Like that to me was like the holy grail. Like I love that show. Like I still love that show. Like I still watch it. I think it still holds up. Some of the voice acting is a little cheesy, but Spider-Man is definitely a special character. He's very relatable, even though he is a super powered individual. I, I I I would make the argument that he is probably the most relatable super powered individual in all of comics. Um, and I think that's why I like him so much. But uh, to currently, he is not my favorite superhero, but he's probably top three for me right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, for for me, I think it is for you. I mean, Batman's our favorite
Yeah,
hero, right?
yeah,
But I don't know about you. I'm not a billionaire, so it's hard for me to relate to Bruce Wayne.
yeah, yeah,
But it definitely, man, it definitely is easier for me to relate to Peter Parker, man. And like you, my intro was that '90s cartoon. And I loved it. And honestly, I didn't really put a note about it in our show notes about it, but man, if you think about that Spider-Man cartoon, just in realm of this podcast, talking about for those who come after, that Spider-Man cartoon was the MCU before the MCU was around, right? Because
one
you
hundred
had the,
percent.
the shared X-Men universe, with Peter Parker. You had all the, you had Punisher coming in, you had Daredevil coming, like you had all
Yep.
these characters coming in. And it was off the back of Spider-Man, right? And you know, really, when you look at the history of the character and the history of Marvel, Stan Lee is clearly, I mean, his legacy is going to live on forever, right? um but when he created the character of Spider-Man, his idea was to not only create something different, but to really buck the norm um of what superheroes were at the time, right? So between him and Steve Ditko and what they did to kind of revolutionize the character, it ushered in a whole genre of superheroes that were unlike any other. And I think, because when you look at the relic portion of our show notes here, right? You look at what superheroes were like in the early, late 50s, early 60s. Any of your teenage type characters, they were sidekicks, right? Robin was sidekick to Batman. Bucky was sidekick to Captain America, right? And for those of you who don't know the comic lore, Bucky, that what you get in Bucky right now for the MCU is not quite what you got for Bucky in the Captain America comics, right? But they were the help. They were um the sometimes the comic relief of the comic books, and they weren't taken seriously. So for Stan Lee to create a character that not only was young and relatable to us as readers, or you and I as kids watching Saturday morning cartoons, it also kind of bucked the norm a little bit of him creating a character that was something that people were grossed out about, right? Like no one likes spiders. I live out in the country and we get spiders all the time, especially in the summer. They're trying to come in from the heat. And like my wife, she'll check every inch of the fucking bed before going to sleep, because if a spider crawls on her, she's done, right? Like people don't generally like spiders. So to create a superhero that was so iconic, that was named Spider-Man, was honestly very unique. And then when you're talking about when he was actually introduced in the comics, analyzing the first time we see Peter, he's not flying, he's not lifting a car, right? You think of that iconic Superman, in action, well, not Action Comics, what was it called?
Yeah,
What
Action
was the first?
Comics.
Was it Action Comics? Yeah, okay,
Action
where
Comics.
he's
Yep.
holding where he's holding the
Yep.
car above, right? So iconic. That wasn't our first introduction to Peter Parker. Our first introduction to Peter Parker was in essence him, being ignored and invisible to his peers and his classmates, right? And like, I'm sorry, that is something I can relate to, you know, like even as an adult, there are times I feel like I get lost in the room, right? And I think
Yeah.
that that feeling is so, I guess universal for all of us. And I saw this video on TikTok, and I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on this point, right? The video on TikTok, and I actually stitched it, and the guy was talking about how um, everyone won't admit why they really love this newest Spider-Man trailer, but it was because it was relatable. Because the Spider-Man we got in this latest brand new day trailer, that's us. We're so
Mm-hmm.
it's people who struggle with depression, struggle with loneliness, struggle with
Mm-hmm.
the feeling of like they're not enough, and they're all alone. And yeah, it is like that's what made Spider-Man so relatable. So in that vein, Dad, man, like talk a little bit about the connection that maybe you have to the character. Before I share mine, like what are some of the things that you think really hit home for the viewers who are watching it like us on morning cartoons, people who maybe love them in the MCU now or the comics or whatever, like what hit so hard for Peter Parker?
So I okay. So for me, um, it's very rare that the alter ego or like the actual secret identity of the superhero to me holds more weight than the actual superhero. Like it's very rare. But like Peter Parker is what makes Spider-Man, not the other way around, right? Like
Yeah.
Batman is, everyone says that the trope with Batman is like that's his true self and Bruce Wayne is his mask. And the same thing with Superman. Superman is Superman and Clark Kent is his mask. With Spider-Man and Peter Parker is Peter Parker and Spider-Man is his mask. He puts that mask on and that's his version of escapism. That's his version of I can go and be something greater than what I really am. And I think
Yeah.
that is so underrepresented and especially in the MCU. Like, don't even get me started about MCU Spider-Man. Um, I think it's such a powerful characteristic of Peter Parker that he doesn't lose himself in the Spider-Man character. Yeah, there are a couple offshoots in the comics where like he becomes like super obsessed with being Spider-Man and like all this other stuff, but he never loses his morals. He never loses his true identity as Peter Parker. Like he's Peter Parker first, and Spider-Man second. But obviously, he takes on that with great power comes great responsibility, and I think that's another really not misrepresented, but there's not enough emphasis put on what that actually means. Um, what makes Peter Parker and Spider-Man special to me is his selflessness. I think that's his greatest superpower is being able to put everybody else before himself. Like even if it's like we saw it a lot in the Tobey Maguire movies. Like he's struggling with his real world stuff. He's struggling with his relationship. He's struggling with his paying his rent. He's failing out of class. Like this is a borderline genius guy, and he can't seem to get his life together because he understands that he has this higher calling to be Spider-Man and to help New York become a better place. So I think to me, like when I look at Spider-Man, I put a lot more emphasis on Peter Parker because I feel like Peter Parker is what makes Spider-Man a special character.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I think when you look at I think they did it really well in the '90s cartoons, and
Yeah.
to talk about like the MCU now, I think what has been a miss for the current iteration of Spider-Man was that like he didn't struggle. You know what I mean? Like he had everything he needed, because he had Tony Stark in his back pocket, right? Where now that all that's stripped away, I think we're you said it best on a earlier episode of the Batman Drew podcast, where like this is actually our first introduction to the real Spider-Man, like this brand new day Spider-Man, and I think that's going to hit. And you know, for me, we got I mean we got hints of it in the MCU whenever he was having to make a decision between going to be able to go fight the bad guy or like going to be with MJ and hanging out with his friends and stuff like that. But like we all feel that. But man, like the tone of the trailer we got for Brand New Day to me was a whole nother level of like depression and almost anxiety that Peter Parker has about not having friends and being alone, right? And it is so relatable for the fact that like he couldn't stay away, like because
Hmm.
we've all been there. And although I hope this isn't like let me stalk MJ type Peter Parker that we get in this movie, I do love the fact that they're starting to approach that, because I think what made him popular in the comics and then going into the cartoons was that we saw ourselves a little bit in Spider-Man. And that kind of brings us to like the innovation of the character. First things first, we all know the origin story of Spider-Man. I would venture a guess that there are very few people out there who actually don't really know the true origin of Spider-Man. But unlike other superheroes like Superman, for example, who was born good, who was born inherently good and didn't know any different, Peter started out human. He started out by letting a burglar go because he was just done with everyone's shit. He was done with the expectation, and he was done with everyone telling him what to do and how to live his life. And that turned into the most horrific experience that a young teenager could have, with that burglar going to go ultimately went on to kill his uncle, right? um and the weight and the guilt that you would have from that, struggling with that honestly, that mental illness, that mental health, not illness but mental health, like that struggle, I guess, for it, without having anybody to talk to. Who was he gonna say what he did to, like he had to handle all that guilt to himself, and that's so incredibly relatable. Eh, Again, we all know that moment, Dad Man, but like when you're really looking at it in retrospect, try to put yourself back in the 60s, when this
Right.
story was written. How different was that, right? We're used to grief now in our comic stories, but that, man, that was a game changer for the way that comics and superheroes were written. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think a lot of the time, like when you hear the word comic book, like you're thinking of this fantastical, colorful story. I mean, but there's a lot of layers of trauma. There's a lot of layers of like darkness and depression, and I think you know, um, putting it front and center like that, and like you know, having what happened to Uncle Ben happen, it essentially is Peter's fault that his uncle was killed. Like he has to live with that, for the rest of his life. And his decision to become Spider-Man was somewhat motivated by what his uncle said, but like he still has to, like every time he puts on his mask, every time he goes and does a good deed or saves somebody, he still has that weight of, if my uncle was still here, maybe I wouldn't be here. Like this is my atonement, right? Same thing with Batman. Like, you know, I know this is a Spider-Man episode, but like it's born out of that same trauma, like the whole sense of, this happened to me. I want to make sure that this doesn't ever happen to anybody ever again, and I'm going to do what I can to make sure that it doesn't. So they're kind of similar in that vein. I think it's a little more tragic because Peter's backstory, he doesn't come from money. He lost his parents at a very young age. It's just him and his aunt, and he has to go through the everyday man struggles while also being this being that could literally just, if he decided I just want to be a dick and just take over everything, nobody could stop me. Like I think people don't realize how strong Spider-Man really is. Like Spider-Man has to hold back so much even when he's fighting other superpowered beings in the Marvel universe. He still has to hold back so much because if he goes off the edge, he could cause serious serious problems. And that's also part of the selflessness of like he has all of this power and he's essentially a limitless person, but he still puts a governor on everything and controls it and approaches it from a state of intellect, which I think helps him because he's a genius level intellect, and he is his cognitive function is a lot higher than like a normal person. I think if you had like a non-genius level character with those powers, there'd probably be a lot more things to go south. But there's just a good balance. I think Stanley was a genius in writing the way that he did. And yeah, I mean, I think it was a risk for him to show a lot of darkness and was in what was perceived as childhood media. Like I think children was the target demographic for comic books back in the 60s. So I think he took a risk, and it was a good one, obviously, because here we are. But yeah, I mean, it could have went the other way, and it would be like, "What are you doing? Like, we're not running this." But I think good stories are usually born out of darkness and usually born out of trauma because as consumers of storytelling, we are suckers for the perseverance story. We love seeing somebody be at rock bottom and pick themselves up and persevere through that.
Man, and to to kick that up an extra notch, right? What really kind of just hits home about the Spider-Man characters is after the tragedy of Uncle Ben, years later in the comic you get the storyline of the death of Gwen Stacy. And
Hmm.
so you had Spider-Man who could have done something but didn't,
Hmm.
and it ended tragically. And then a Spider-Man who did do something but failed. And there for all the hit and misses, and I do think I think there were more hits in the MCU Spider-Man than there have been misses, but I think we can all agree there's been some things that we would have loved different. The one thing that I absolutely loved um was when they reintroduced the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, and they're all three of the Spider-Man are having that moment on the rooftop, and Andrew Garfield talks about the death of Gwen Stacy, and he talks about how he stopped holding back his punches, and you saw that there was a darker Spider-Man after that movie, right? Um, I I want to see some of that, right? Like in a live action form, because there are some Spider-Man storylines in the comics that get super dark.
Hmm.
And I don't know if they'll ever, if the actual MCU Spider-Man, maybe when if Sony ever breaks their deal and they move away from Disney. But I think that there is, so many interesting ways and storylines that you can tell with the Spider-Man character that have been introduced in the comics that have paved the way for other stories, because man, heroes, especially when the death of Gwen Stacy happened, heroes didn't fail to save the day for the ones that they loved. They always
Yep.
came out heroic for the ones that they loved. So for Gwen Stacy to die, and man, to die the way she did, just so fucking graphic. and
Hmm.
and like right now, with if you're listening to this and you've never read the comic, or you weren't there when it happened, I get it. You're looking at it, you're like, what? Like, yeah, it's a little, you see the little crack symbol, she snaps her neck, whatever, right? Like, you get all that. You didn't have that stuff in comics at that time, right?
Right.
Not for the love interest of the hero anyways. And so I think Spider-Man has been paving the way for things that we are accustomed to now for years and years and years. And I love the fact that, Stan Lee, when he wrote these storylines, at least the bulk of them anyways, yeah, they were catered to a younger audience, but man, he wasn't afraid to talk about things that we are, as a society, we shelter our kids and our young teenagers because we don't think that they can handle things. And
Hmm.
the truth is, it's like death is a touchy subject, and to be able to handle it the way that Stan Lee did when he wrote this character in the death of Uncle Ben, um yeah, man, he spoke to us the same way Final Fantasy spoke to us as kids by telling us these adult driven storylines and not talking down to us. Stan Lee
Hmm.
did the same thing for Spider-Man, and it ushered in, you can say, look, Fantastic Four, I get it, first family. Marvel Comics started when Spider-Man started. Like, that was when Marvel really had its launching point, because it was so drastically different. It
Yep.
and so I don't know. To me, the heaviness of some of the storylines are just incredible. And moving on to the next point of just how it innovated the world of superheroes. You're looking at Steve Ditko and the way that he designed the full mask of Spider-Man to be used as a tool, right? It wasn't just a cover. It was an idea that honestly anyone could be Spider-Man. Like, it was a universal hero. You didn't know who could actually be under the suit, and I think Spider-Man carried that along, whether it was intentional or not. When you start getting into the Spider-Verse type stuff, and you start looking at the other
Yeah.
Spider-Man you had, especially, probably the second most popular is probably Miles Morales.
Hmm.
But you also had, who I know it's your personal favorite Spider-Man, I believe, right? Ben Riley, Scarlet Spider. Like,
Oh yeah.
you
Yeah.
like, anyone could have been Spider-Man, right? And I think that it was a very good message in the first Into the Spider-Verse movie, where you see Miles Morales putting over the fake Spider-Man mask, and you have Stan Lee, the animated Stan Lee, talking in the comic shop about how anyone can be Spider-Man. It's just so true. It's our really our first universal hero. Not everyone can be Batman. We ain't got the money, right? Not everyone can be Superman because we're not all gods, but everyone
Right.
can do the right thing when it's the right time to do it. And that's what Spider-Man kind of taught us, man. Any thoughts on how they designed the character of Spider-Man to kind of be that universal hero?
I mean, I think that they did a really good job because they kept it light. He's a kid, right? He's a fifth. I think he first gets bit when he's 15, so he's a high school kid. He still has to go through all of those trials and tribulations as a teenager, and then moving into like a college and moving through college and moving into adulthood. Like he still has to carry all of those decisions. He still has to carry that approach to his heroism, right? Like he has to be that beacon of like like Spider-Man doesn't really have like a one-to-one equivalent to me in like the DC universe. Like there's
Yeah.
a lot of heroes that you can go like, okay, well Iron Man is Batman, and you could clearly like just make the connection. I think Spider-Man is like an overall like amalgamation of a lot of different heroes. Like Superman gets that trope of, the beacon of hope and positivity. That's what Spider-Man does, right? He gives people hope, bright colors, good with kids. Everybody loves him. Unless of course like you're dealing with storylines where JJ's making him to be like a villain, or Kingpin's taking over the city, and everyone that hates Spider-Man like stuff like that. And then, but he also has that kind of quiet, like he's not very boastful about his abilities. Like he's more humble because he's a kid that comes from nothing. Iron Man's very like out there and flamboyant about it. I mean, Bruce Wayne is very flamboyant about being Bruce Wayne. I mean, he hides his identity well as Batman, but he's out there, in the public eye and like all these big figures. And um Spider-Man just kind of stays street level and like stays grounded for
Yeah.
like the longest time. He doesn't really ever come into money. He doesn't really ever like become a millionaire. Like he works, he goes through school, and he kind of does, like, if you take the Spider-Man if you take the Spider-Man-ness away from him, he's just a regular guy trying to make it. So um I think to me like that is it might sound boring to some people because they want like the big like bombastic like pow bang boom stuff, but I think like when you're telling the story of it, I think that's why Spider-Man has endured as long as he has, because it is relatable. And especially you start as a kid, Spider-Man as a kid is a different hero to you than when you're an adult. There's just different layers of his character that could um you know hold weight with a lot of different ages, a lot of different people. And I think universally, yeah, he's probably the most well loved superhero and the most relatable in that sense as well.
Yeah, and I love the idea of having a Spider-Man who, and a superhero who, um, has all this power, because in the comics, we even saw it a little bit in the animated cartoon, and you saw glimpses of it in the MCU. Like yeah, to your point, Spider-Man's much more powerful than he looks to be on the surface, right? In the MCU, one of my most notable moments was in Civil War, in the airport fight, where he's fighting Bucky and Falcon, and he's just goofing off. He's a kid, like
Hmm.
rattling his mouth, just excited to be there. And you have Bucky, super soldier serum, swinging with his vibranium arm, and Spider-Man catching it. Be like, oh wow, this is a metal arm. Like that's so cool, right? Like it just, to me, like how powerful he truly is amazing. And honestly, there's some storylines where like he is the most powerful superhero in the Marvel universe, because one, because of not only his physical abilities, but two, because of his moral compass, right?
Hmm.
But I love all of that power, and he still is late for dinner. He still forgets to bring eggs home, to Aunt May.
Yep.
He's
Yep.
still trying to figure out how to pay rent so that him and Aunt May have a place to live. those things are awesome to me, man, because for me in my professional life, like there are times where I feel like I'm on top of the world, but then I come home and I'm like, shit, like I sacrificed all that and I didn't spend any time with my kid, or I
Yep.
got to do this or that for Scarlett or things like that. And those struggles are real, man. And I think that's what makes the character super relatable. So what did it cause as a ripple effect for the content we consume now? Okay, so first things first, the first note that I have um is it ushered in an era that honestly kind of revolutionized superheroes altogether, with the X-Men. You I don't think you get the X-Men, you know characters and the way that they were presented to us without the success that you've gotten with Spider-Man, especially when the giant size X-Men came out and you had that cover with Wolverine on it and things like that, and you finally had your what we know now as our core cast of X-Men, because
Hmm.
those were flawed individuals. They were
Hmm.
flawed people. And I think that because we successfully got a superhero who was truly relatable, it allowed us to be able to accept other superheroes that were less godlike. I mean, you're talking about mutants with all these superpowers, but that are terrified of regular humans because of bigotry and
Hmm.
just society as a whole and the way that is presented, very very too close to home, if you want to be honest, right? Like with
Yeah.
our real world now. So
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
for me, Dad, man, like what do you think, like when you look at some of the characters that we have now that came from the entry of Spider-Man, which ones of those stand out to you? Are the X-Men kind of a standout for you? Are there any other ones that come to mind?
Actually, it's funny that you bring this up because I had a similar conversation about a month ago with a buddy of mine who's really into comics, and my second favorite comic book character of all time is Dick Grayson Nightwing.
Mm,
Not Dick Grayson Robin, Dick Grayson Nightwing. And without Spider-Man, you don't get Nightwing because, like you said earlier, like the trope of the
yeah.
sidekick was just there to be an extension of the main hero to, like, you know give some like comic relief, but also the sidekick was the reader. Like, we were the sidekicks going on these big adventures with Captain America or these big adventures with Batman, and there was never a real graduation from sidekick to your own hero. Bucky got his much later in the comics, um, but Nightwing, you went from being the boy wonder. You went from being Bruce Wayne Ward with the little pixie shorts and the tights and the very like ridiculous outfit to him establishing himself as his own hero. Um, but also just being a better person, a better human being than Bruce Wayne, because he dealt with his darkness differently than Bruce did. And my the closest comparison I can give from Spider-Man to a DC character is Dick Grayson,
Yeah.
because Dick Grayson, yes, he can fall back on the wealth and everything of Bruce Wayne, but he chooses not to. He chooses to leave Gotham. He chooses to establish himself as his own hero. He goes through his struggles of being an everyday working man, like being a cop or doing this, a private investigator, trying to make it while also being a non superpowered hero. Um, so I think the most important thing that Spider Man has done has given that ability for these sidekicks to upgrade themselves. Like, and the list goes on. I mean, you have Nightwing, you have Speedy, and it became Arsenal or Red Arrow later on.
Yeah.
And then you have the whole Teen Titans thing. Like, the Teen Titans was a team of sidekicks or B characters that is like their own thing, like I think Spider-Man really paved the way for that younger hero to get a lot of spotlight, and especially like when you look at the Flash, like Kid Flash, Bart Allen had a huge impact on with the Crisis on Infinite Earths and stuff like that, like getting trapped in the Speed Force and bringing Barry back from the Speed Force, and then Wally getting trapped, and then it was just there's a lot of good things that Spider-Man has done, but I think the biggest the biggest thing that he's done for other heroes is you're establishing newer heroes from existing characters, so they have a backstory. They don't have to come up with this brand new like idea from scratch. It's just the natural evolution that you would expect from a lot of other heroes, and then that trickles down to like the Miss Marvels, and trickles down to like, the other younger characters that we have in like DC and Marvel and other forms of media too. Like, it's just nice because the original idea was kids can't be superheroes, right? Well, explain Shazam to me then. Billy Batson is a 10-year-old kid with these godlike
Yeah.
powers. I mean, that is to me as a kid, that would have been the ultimate hero. Like, I could just say Shazam and I turn into this godlike creature, and he never loses his kidness. Like, Shazam is just a kid with muscles and powers. Like, he never loses his psyche. He never loses his mentality as a kid. So, yeah, I think those you know bring us some interesting stories. But I respect Spider-Man's lineage as a character because it started off as experimentation with a younger age demographic and has become something that allows heroes to come in all ages, forms, shapes, and sizes. And I think that could be more relatable to a lot of other people.
So I totally agree with that. I will say though that I think that that is both a win and a loss for what Spider-Man has paved the way for. Because when you're talking about the coming in age genre, right, the teen hero of today, um, what drives me insane is that we don't always have to have an origin story of a fucking kid. Like, and it seems like it happens all the time, right? And it drives me nuts. Like, and you look at the MCU now. I know I keep talking about the MCU, but I feel like it's the MCU right now is more relevant than comics, than the world of comics right now, right? So that's
Yeah.
why I keep
Yeah.
harkening back to it. Um, like when you look at our cast of heroes, a vast majority of them are starting to become younger and younger. They've introduced Miss Marvel into it. You have what's her name? Kate, is it, no, it's not Kate Barton.
Kate Bishop.
Kate Bishop, who
Yeah.
is inevitably a teenage version of Hawkeye, right? Like,
Right.
and even She-Hulk, even though I know she's a grown ass woman in the show, still very young in appearance in the way that she looks. And so I just, on one hand, yes, like Spider-Man paved the way. So when you look at all these coming of age stories, like they live in the house that Peter Parker built, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't always have to be that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we have gone too far the other way, right? Because I think what when you look at what Spider-Man was to us, to me and you, um it hit us at the right time that helped us grow. We grew up with Spider-Man, grew up with him
Correct.
at the same everything, right? So when you fast forward 20 years later and we had the introduction, or 15 years later we had the introduction of Iron Man in the
Mm-hmm.
MCU. That was a grown
Mm-hmm.
ass man. We were grown ass men at the time, right? So it was a
Mm-hmm.
different hero that came in and got us invested. And so I think there has to be a good balance, right? What is the balance between 5 years from now getting my son, his first superhero to really be invested in, versus keeping us um entertained with the heroes that you're giving us now. Like, I'd even watch Ironheart, the
Oh,
MCU
The
show.
Riri one.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I didn't care about a teeny bopper kid, like who was
Yeah.
out there,
Yeah.
playing Iron Man. Like, I just didn't. I What was the Agatha all along? First of all, I Catherine Hahn I don't care for, so, but that's a whole separate topic. I
Oh
got a lot
man.
of hate on a video I posted about that.
Oh, I love
Catherine,
Catherine Hahn.
I don't, man. I can't stand if she's in something, instantly turned off. But I hated that, like, it revolved so much around Scarlett's kids, like, and it just, because I was like, care for I don't care for a teenage storyline. I don't care for a kid storyline. And I understand there has to be a balance, but to me it's like I feel like we've swung too far the other way in some cases, and I
Sure.
think we need to dial that back in. But um I it's part of the reason why, even though I think it's going to be really stupid, but in the world of Spider-Man, the Nicolas Cage Spider Noir
Mm-hmm.
show that's coming out on Amazon, I'm kind of looking forward to it because
Yeah,
we're
me
gonna have a
too.
60-year-old Spider-Man.
Yeah, I think it's gonna
Ben
be really
Riley,
cool.
is his alias in this. It's gonna be interesting one way or the other. But let me ask you a very important question, and I'm curious to know what you think. I've always lived in the world where I've always thought Batman was the most popular superhero in the entire world. I felt like if you showed
Hmm.
anyone a Batman symbol, they would instantly know who that
Hmm.
person is. I feel, however, though, in the last 10 or 15 years, I think if you found a way to be able to poll everyone in the entire world, more people would know Spider Man than they would know Batman. Do you think he's the most popular
Um,
superhero in the world?
so no, I actually think the most popular superhero in the world is Superman.
Okay.
I think if you were to print out each superhero's logo, like if you were to print out a Superman logo, a Batman logo, and a Spider-Man logo, and you were to go randomly like just person to person and show them like, hey, what's this? I think the everybody would know what Superman is. Everybody would know what all three of them are because they are all popular figures in pop culture. But I think the most popular is Superman, followed by Batman, and I think Spider-Man is the third most popular comic book character in the entire. We're talking about the world, right?
Yeah.
Maybe in the United States, yeah, Spider-Man is more popular, but also it's the way the writing is approached. Superman and Batman have a lot of stories that don't take place here in America. You
Yeah.
know, there was a whole line of comics when Batman did Batman Inc. where he was literally traveling around the world just solving problems. And Superman is a worldly superhero. Spider-Man is not really a worldly superhero, and he doesn't have to be because he's your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Now,
Yeah.
when you start adding in, multiverse and you start adding in things like Spider UK and Spider-Man India and Spider-Man this and Spider-Man that, yes, now you're talking a broader scape. But I think, I still think one and two is Superman, Batman, and then Spider-Man's probably number three. Um, as far as like popularity is concerned, as far as like most recognizable is concerned, um, I think it's all subjective though. Like I think it's such an impossible conversation to have like who is the best because I think it's all opinion based. Like to me the greatest superhero of all time is Batman and I will die on that hill. Um and the easiest argument I make is this is a non-superpowered individual who holds his own weight with god level
Yeah.
beings. Like it is insane, and obviously, it's all based off writing because, again, these are characters that stories are written about. So the superpower really is the pen, whoever's penning it, whoever's writing the story. But when you put it into context, you're talking about a dude who is flesh and blood like me and you. Yeah, he's peak physical human shape or whatever. But Spider Man's up there too, though. Like, Spider Man is
Yeah.
definitely touched, God level status, especially if you go through like the power cosmic when he gets his cosmic spider powers and all that. Like he has approached god level. So um yeah, I think when you're talking about popularity and you're talking about like pop culture, I think Superman and Batman are still just the most iconic, most popular superheroes. Like if you're looking at everything media, Superman and Batman have had the most movies. They've had the most shows, the most games, the most like they have just been around for so. You're talking about they've been around since the 30s. Superman in 38 and Batman in 39. They've just been around for so long. They've never had any of their titles canceled. They've had multiple titles, like it's just it's like it's going to be hard to knock those guys down a peg
Yeah.
when it comes to like actual popularity.
And I think it's safe to say though that out of those three, Spider Man is the most relatable
Yeah.
of those three, right? And I think that's why he's been arguably one of the most profitable heroes of all time, from comic sales to television to now movies. And honestly, like he paved the way for a lot of the superhero stories that we love today and the characters that we adore today. Like we wouldn't have them if Spider-Man hadn't hit the way that he hit, right? And allowed us to be able to open our viewership to a character that wasn't a god. He may have had godlike strength and ability and agility, but it was all packaged inside of a very vulnerable person who
Hmm.
was normal. He was us,
Hmm.
right? And I think that really is what makes Spider-Man hit home. So I'm gonna close this out a little bit differently here, Dad. Man, I'm gonna turn it over to you first, and I'll finish. If you could, one of my biggest things I wish I would have been able to do in my lifetime is I wish I would have been able to meet Stanley. I know I've
Oh
a lot of
my god.
circuits and stuff like that. I just never had the opportunity to. If you had the opportunity to say one thing to Stan Lee, in regards to Spider-Man, what would you take the opportunity to say to him?
Oh man, that's such a great question. Because it's like, you're talking about, like, as far as human beings are concerned, like you're talking about one of the holy grail human beings.
Yeah,
I think if simply I would just walk up to him, shake his hand, and say thank you. Because not just Spider-Man, but like the X-Men, the Incredible Hulk, Fantastic Four, just all of his creations and like the risks that he took, and I'm sure like the criticisms that he had to endure, and I'm glad that he got to see, a lot of his creations come to life, because
yeah,
it is pretty phenomenal when you think about, like, you know translating these comic books onto the big screen. Like, no matter what happens, right? Like, the state of the world the way it is right now, Hollywood and movies is still the biggest form of media that we have in this country. Like, nothing is bigger than a movie, even though a movie is only like 2 hours long, and sometimes you have these great shows that give you 15-hour long episodes. Like, they still don't hold a candle to like movies, right? Like, that is like the big boys in the entertainment industry is movies. Like, so the fact that he was around to see and to be in, I'm glad he was cameoed like everything. That's so awesome that they did that. um I'm glad he got to see it. But I would probably just say thank you. He's definitely one of my heroes, um because he kind of just did what he wanted to. He didn't really like, he took a risk, yeah, but he still did it. And I respect people who go after what they want, even though it's probably against like your regular like society constraints. Because if you don't take risks, like, look, if he wouldn't have never taken that risk, we probably wouldn't even be having this conversation. So I would probably just say thank you and maybe like take a picture with him, just so I could, even though I would put that moment like in my mind and like hold on to the actual moment as a memory, it would be nice to have like a physical representation of that, because that would have been such a huge moment for me personally. But I would probably just shake his hand and say thank you for like pouring your heart and soul into your creations and sharing them with the world, because I think what he created, even to this day, is very special.
yeah, man. I'm in full agreement. I actually don't know if I could say it any better than the way you just delivered it there. And I think a lot of us feel the same way. I think a lot of the people who are listening to this feel the same way, just because of everything he's done. And that Spider-Man character, so iconic. Um, and it's going to be a character that lives on, man, for a long, long, long time. And I think it's because of that relatability that we talked about. I think it's because of um, the way the character has always been presented with a that struggle between, I can do anything I want to do, but it doesn't mean it's right to do it. You
Hmm.
have that kind of sense of morality with other heroes, but at the end of the day, none of them gain that morality because of decisions that they made that negatively impacted their life so much, like Spider-Man, and it just so relatable. So, but here, like, guys, for those of you who are listening, it's not always about just what we think, right? I want to be able to know what you guys think. So make sure to engage with this podcast. Make sure to, um, you know, drop in the comments. Let us know what Spider-Man meant to you. do you believe that Spider-Man was a character that revolutionized the world of comics and superheroes? Do you think that he paved the way for those who came after, or do you think we're just full of shit? I would love to be able to know what your thoughts are. I genuinely would. And listen, I just want to. Like, I always close this out the same way, but I truly mean it. If you've listened this long, I appreciate it. I really do. I appreciate you engaging with us, talking with us, listening to us, because we know that it's hard to make time for the things you love. So the fact that you checked out this podcast, like, truly means the world to us, and we just want to say thank you. Dad, man, any closing thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
Yeah, I'm really excited for Brand New Day. I think it's probably going to be the best Spider-Man movie to date, which is saying a lot, because I think Spider-Man 2 still has that title, but I'm really excited with the direction that they're going, and I'm really excited to finally get a proper Spider-Man as opposed to like Iron Man Jr. So like I'm really excited for that. But also, side note, I hope we get after Tom Holland is done. I mean, I know he's getting older, but I want like an adult Spider-Man. Like
Yeah,
I think the best version of Spider-Man that we've ever gotten was the Insomniac video games, the PS Spider-Man PS4. That to me is like, dude, like adult Spider-Man
agreed.
is awesome. So I want to see adult Spider-Man in the MCU.
Totally agree. We didn't even hit on the video games. There's so many iconic Spider-Man video games. Like
Yeah.
that could be a
Yeah.
whole separate episode. So, guys, remember to go like and subscribe, and more importantly, share the podcast, because that's what Spider-Man would do. So we'll catch you guys again on the same Batman Drew time at the same Batman Drew channel. Thanks, guys.